You're listening to WPVM LP in Asheville, North Carolina, 1037 on your dial, and globally at WPVM.org.
Bountiful valley, way up high, fertile and green land of the sky. Tip of the Blue Ridge, mountain range, lengthy autumns, lingering springs. Up on the parkway, take a drive, slope down the French Broad, take a dive, maybe enjoy a local brew. All that and built more too in Asheville.
It's Wednesday and 10 o'clock, so you're listening to Storyville because you know that when you hear Queen Bee and the Honey Lovers sing Asheville. So, folks, welcome. And I have to tell you, this is a very, very special show, and I have a very special guest. So, let's get started. I'm going to introduce to you Gwenda Ledbetter. Gwenda began storytelling in Asheville 50 years ago. She became the story lady at local libraries, and she starred in a local TV show for children titled Tales from the Red Rocker on our local station, WLOS TV. Gwenda's first appearance as a storyteller at the International Storytelling Festival in Jonesboro, Tennessee, occurred in 1979. That's 41 years ago, folks. She then returned to Jonesboro to tell and teach people from all over the world in workshops. Gwenda is a member of Asheville Storytelling Circle, and she was part of a group that founded the North Carolina Storytelling Guild. From there, she received her Lifetime Achievement Award in 2009 from the Guild. Gwenda has written and performed two one-woman shows, Friday's Father in 2006 and Old Woman in the Basement, 2009. One of her audience members, Madeline LaAngle, wrote to Gwenda and said, "Your stories touch the core of my strongest feelings as an unknown member of your audience. Your stories make me proud to be human." Gwenda, knowing you makes me so proud just to be a storyteller and to know you. You've inspired so many tellers to grow and to become better tellers, and that's me included. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming the Grande of storytelling, a very special person and one of the kindest people I've ever known. My guest today is Gwenda Ledbetter. Hi, Gwenda. How you doing?
Hello, pretty good, pretty good.
So, let's just get started. You're living in Asheville, but where were you born and raised?
No, Cape Charles, Virginia, on the eastern shore of Virginia, that's separated from the rest of Virginia by the Chesapeake Bay, right?
So you were kind of in your own little place growing up in Virginia.
Ah, right. Well, I guess so. The Eastern Shore is definitely your own place. You share it with other people who know all about your business. So I grew up in a town full of parents, mothers and fathers who were keeping their eye on you.
And isn't that a good way to grow up?
Yeah, I think so. When you're there, though, you don't think so. You think, get out of here and get out of my business, right? So,
Well, before I ask you about what brought you here, I have to kind of break a norm. Forgive me for asking, but I have to.
mhm.
Can you share with us your age?
Oh, my age, 90. Yeah,
90.
91 in February, right?
So you're about to turn the calendar to 91 in just a few months. This is mid-December, so you just have about another month to go. So,
Mhm.
Gwenda, what brought you to Asheville?
My husband, John was a neurologist, and he got a job here. His first job is a neurologist in practicing. And so I came with him.
And when
And
was that?
oh God, let me see, dates. I'm not sure, I
A
forgot.
long time ago.
1959.
1959. Okay. Well, when did you first become aware of the story and storytelling? Where did it happen?
Well, the first time, story was with me from the first time I bent over and found a fairy book. And I love to read. And when we moved from one town to another, I was lonesome. And so the books became my friends. Uh, and the story, of course, mother was a kindergarten teacher and she told stories to the kids, right?
Uh,
Uh, but story was to me, it was like another world. It's another world, and it is, isn't it? Right?
So, was there a special time in your life where this became really important to you, storytelling and stories?
Storytelling, I never thought about story. I was reading uh, all through school, went into the backyard, into the plum tree, and used. I found actually when I went back years later, I found a page out of one of the books that I'd take there, and that so it would be the world of the kings, the queens, the princes, and so forth, and the people, the younger ones that get in trouble, but they get out of it, and so that was a whole world, right?
So let me ask you, what you just said. Does that mean the elders in the story took care of their kids like they did in your life in your town in Virginia?
Well, the elders in the story, but that's interesting. They were always, that made the story, that sometime with the elders, like the one I told. I think I told it yesterday, but the one of like meat, love, salt, where the father's this very rich man and very arrogant, and he asks his daughters how much they love him, and when the youngest says, like meat loves salt, he kicks her out. And so he does. That's a good story, Chuck. You ought to look at it.
I will have to do that. Thank you. Well, the other thing that I find in your stories, Gwenda, and by the way, we see each other occasionally at the storytelling circle, the Asheville Storytelling Circle. We've attended each other's stories, and I have to say, every time I see you, my heart just flutters, and I just can't wait to hug you and say, "Hey, Gwenda, how are you doing?" So, your stories, Gwenda, are so rich with characters, and it seems like some of those characters are people that you see in
I
town.
have to turn that phone off, right?
Okay, yeah, that's never good. There we go.
Uh, okay, Becky, I'm online with Chuck. Say hello to Chuck.
Hi, Becky.
I did. Thank you, honey. Bye. The kids call and to tell me to take my medicine.
And folks, that's real life. Stories are also about real life, and what Gwenda just did was let you into a moment of real life.
Right.
And I think Gwenda now has a story about that.
They're
But
really
where we were before you got the call, Gwenda, was about the story, the characters in your story. They're so rich. Now, do you apply those to like people in your real life here in Asheville? Is there a tie-in between the characters that you tell and the people in this town?
in you mean in Asheville?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, right. Well, I mean, if you find a character, they're usually made up of somebody that you've known, and so if you recognize them and say, "Oh yeah, right, yeah, there you are,"
Okay.
uh, and so and in other words, it fleshes it out. I think writers do that too. Uh,
Okay.
yeah.
Well, it seemed like one of your characters, I think, was somebody named Toby or Martha Doherty.
Martha Dowdy was this character. She was the lawyer's wife in my hometown of Anancock, and she was pregnant. She lost the child, but she stayed pregnant from then on. I mean, she wore maternity dresses, and it was sad, but it was also funny, because people would come. Here comes Martha, and she was constantly talking about the baby or something that was going to come. Again, sadness, but then humor, and I mean, she found a twig. This is in World War II. She saw a twig coming up the river and declared it was a Japanese submarine and that we were going to be invaded. She had the whole town upset, right?
So this is a lady that maybe wasn't totally balanced.
Right. But at the same time, she was smart as, a whip, the way people are, the way we are sometimes.
You
It's
know,
that little idiosyncrasy, right?
and you're making such a great point because people will pass judgment on others based
Uh,
on an idiosyncrasy instead of getting to know the whole person.
right.
Okay. Well, another thing I mentioned in the introduction was You were known as Story Lady. How did that come about? And tell us a little bit
Oh,
about.
I'd love to tell you about it.
Oh, that's great.
I came to town and moved into a neighborhood, thank God, so my kids could just go out the door and play. And so there was the North Asheville Library. And I went there to get books, usually read to them and showed pictures at night. Uh, and John Bridges, who sang tenor just behind me in the Presbyterian church, was there. He says, Gwenda, the way he always spoke in centaur. I think you should come down to the library and tell stories to the children. Well, I had a pile of books so high that they were falling out on the ground, and he was helping me pick them up. So I went to the library, and Ruth Easter was in charge of the storytelling and the children's department. And she says, why don't you go as the story lady? And then that became the television show, the small show, every Saturday morning, and for 8 minutes on the Mr. Bill show.
The Mr. Bill show.
Oh yeah, that was he was established, but he let there was this little insert, this little that I filmed once a month.
So you became the character Story Lady, literally on the TV show. And you also started at the downtown library, or you said, I'm sorry, North Asheville Library.
Well, but we were, if you were Story Lady, you went to all of them, right, downtown and all the West Asheville and so forth.
Was there, so you told before children. Tell us about the children that you told and some of the maybe special stories that you were able to feel from the children in the audience.
Oh gosh, right. So many. I remember one little boy loved the story of the peddler, and that's the peddler of Balladrine. Try to spell that. It's Irish. And he loved that peddler, and the peddler was a very little quiet little man who became so poor that he dreamed. And St. Peter came and told him to get himself over to Dublin and stand on the bridge. And so he did. He followed his dream. And after 3 goes from St. Peter, and nobody said anything to him until the last time that he was planning to go off and die in an alleyway. And the man from the restaurant close by, said he'd been watching him, and what was he doing there? Turns out the restaurant man had a dream, and St. Peter told him there was money buried in a town in a house in Balladrine. So the peddler went home, got all the money he needed to live out the rest of his life. So listen to your dreams, right?
And how did that affect the little boy?
He was satisfied.
Okay. Okay. Were there any other children that touched you when you would tell their stories?
All of them, right. There was one that came every time to West Asheville, and she was crippled with some of the childhood diseases, and twisted, and it was truly hard to look at her. I mean, because you wanted to weep. But one day somehow I managed just to look in her eyes, and she was so into the story. And so ever after that, I just went to the eyes, and she loved me, and I loved her back. Right? It was wonderful. Right?
Well, how long and when was it that your TV show aired in Asheville?
I'm not sure how long that was. Gosh. Right. Do you not knowing? I mean, do you mind not knowing?
No, not at all.
It was
No, it's all right. It's all right.
I think David Holt says it was like 16 years or something like that. I think.
And what role did David Holt, who's another storyteller, what role did he have in your show?
I got asked to tell by John Bridges, who was Mr. Art in town. He was into everything. And one day he said in his tenori voice, Gwenda, I think you should ask this young man, David Holt, to be on your TV show. And I did. And he was grand. And I said, and by that time I was getting a little weary of coming up with stories. And I said, how'd you like to share this with me? 2 stories a month. And so we did. And he didn't know anything about it at first. He started out with string stories. But they were perfect, actually. The camera, centered down on those, and he went from those on to other stories. It was grand.
Did he have any other impact in your life?
David, oh yes, right, indeed. He got me started, bless him, over at the National, at the. First he found Connie, Reagan Blake, and right. Barbara. Got 2 friends that go to this thing over in Jonesbury, said, I think you ought to try it. And so I did, and sent word, applied. And I remember the first meeting, scared to death. But David said, it'll be good, it'll be fun. And it was. And meeting the other storytellers was incredible. Right.
And this was 41 years ago, 1979.
Something like that. I'm really bad on dates.
Well, I read it in the introduction, so let's go with 1971. Now, you told us about the children in your audience. What about your own family and your own children?
Oh, right. Well, I always worried about, because before I went into the telling at the library, we would sit on the sofa, and I had 3, so but and sometimes Carol, who was the youngest, would sit in my lap, but the arms went around here, the book was out here, and we went into the stories. I remember, and poetry. There was an Ogden Nash that Bob, whenever I hit twangle then, which was an Ogden Nash description, he would die laughing, and we couldn't even tell anymore after, or read anymore.
And how about now? How are your children now?
Bob is in, I talked to him yesterday, he's in Montana, where they're, the pandemic is bad out there. And he teaches music. He's the head of the percussion department at the University of Montana, which is beautiful with the mountains around him. Mm-hmm. Becky is here in town. She taught school. And she helps keep me in line, which is hard. Blessings. I mean, it's blessings, honor. And Carol is a teacher. She teaches the little ones, and she's down in Spartanburg. So
you must be so proud of all 3.
Oh yes, indeed.
And if I may add, I'm not your caretaker, but I would imagine you're not that hard to take care of.
Well, I don't know. You have to talk to Becky about that.
Well, it's so good to have family. And I remember, I don't know if you remember this, but David Joe Miller hosted a show in which you were the only teller, and it was at the downtown library. And it was sitting next to your daughter and family, and they were such nice people. You could tell they were your family because, like you, so nice and so open. It was just nice to be able to see the connection between them and you.
Thank you.
And that was a very special
wonderful occasion too. I love that.
Yeah.
It was grand.
Well, and that was such a special show because it was all you. And I remember you're getting a standing ovation at the end. Mm-hmm. You probably don't remember that.
No, I remember that. You don't forget standing ovation.
So I know you tell what we will call make-believe stories. Do you also tell personal stories?
Oh, yeah, right. Uh-huh.
Okay.
I've got, I think, a tape with mostly personal stories on it, right.
Okay.
I've never done much with. I did, I made that, and I made another tape with fairy tales on it, so forth.
So can you maybe share one of those stories with us now?
Oh, a personal story, good Lord, yeah. Well, I've been thinking about the Christmas that that it snowed. It never snowed on the Eastern Shore, hardly ever. And this particular Christmas, I think it was 1939. I remember in history, that was when Hitler started to make his move out into the, and capturing and containing different countries. I didn't know much about that, but it snowed and that hardly ever happened. And the day that it started coming down, I was in the kindergarten room. My mother taught kindergarten. And I just finished cleaning the floor and the tables and looked out and gave this cry of joy because of the snow. And then I saw an old woman, and she was African American. She was dressed in brown, so it was like this brown streak going down the street, in between the snowflakes. I knew it was old Annie. She worked for everybody in town, and then when she got too old to work, they said, she didn't. They put her in a house down near the wharf at the end of the street. But she didn't like to stay there. She liked people. And so here she was going downtown in the middle of what was looking like a good snowstorm. So I yelled, and Mother came out of the back. She was cooking that Christmas Eve dinner and was muttering and protesting. So we went out with her yelling at me to put on my galoshes. And we followed Annie all the way down to the town. And when she got to the post office, she cut across toward the shoemaker. We had a shoemaker. And his name was Mr. Fredericks, and he had white hair and twinkly blue eyes. He'd sit by the window, and when you went by, he would say, "Got some peppermints," and you'd open the door, go in, and he'd load you. This is the kid. I don't think he did it for the grown-ups. Load your pockets with peppermint. He was a beautiful little man, but then he changed. And everybody in town knew it because it was a small town, and we couldn't figure out what happened. And the postmaster said, "Came in, got a letter from Austria," and says, went right away into that dark mood. Apparently, it was when, as I said, Hitler was starting his thing, and he had a brother over there, and he'd gotten a letter that said whereabouts of family unknown. So he was scared to death that that they'd fallen into Hitler's power, or whatever. So he drew into the self and growled and went on with the shoemaker, but Mr. Fredericks had put peppermint in your pockets was gone. And so when Annie went through the door, he glared at her and said, "Get her out of here." And Mother felt of her clothes, and she went in the back and got one of his bathrobes, and she's soaked. And then she said, "Tom, I've got the family coming for dinner. I cannot take her home and take care of her. Here she is, and here she had to stay." So we went off, leaving Annie with this disgruntled man who was furious at the world. So Christmas happened, all the food and all the turkey and the presents. And when all the relatives left, Mother sank down in the chair. "Just let me have a cup of coffee and a cigarette," she said, "and I'll get on with it." And then she sprung up out of the chair and she says, "We got to go see what happened to Annie." So we go downtown and knock on the door, and nobody answers. So we go on in to the shop and it's empty. And then Mr. Fredericks came out of the back, and he was different. I mean, his eyes were gleaming. He said, "Oh, Merry Christmas." And I wonder what in the world happened. "Will you have coffee?" he said. "Well, Mother, you might as well say, do you want to breathe?" She loved coffee. So we sat down. I had chocolate, and he told us, he said, "When you leave, Annie is wrecking my shop. So I think, feed her." So I sit her down. She picks up her napkin and drops it in the floor like I'm her butler or her waiter. And I start to yell, but then I think, why not? It's crazy. The whole world is crazy. So he picks up the napkin and I put it in her lap. She ate 2 bowls of soup, nearly fell asleep in her plate. So I take her and I put her in my bed. Poor old woman. And I pull up the cover. And then I go and sit in the living room. I mean, in this workroom. And the snow is hitting the windows. And it's Christmas Eve. At first I weep. Seeing Annie somehow just let all that was bitter inside of me melt. And I wept all the tears for all the people that are opposed and hurt and broken by others. And I was at peace for the first time in so many weeks. And I slept. In the morning, I called Belfair and they come and they take Annie. And on the way out the door, she turns to me and winks. And one of the helpers said, she does this every Christmas. She finds a house somewhere, some one of us in town, and goes there so she can have a holiday on Christmas Eve. She went out and again, she winked at me. Oh, my dears, she brought me such a golden heart now. Merry Christmas, he said. And it was.
Oh, Gwenda, that's such a touching story on so many levels. And the world that we're in now, that story to me has much more meaning because it's about embracing culture. It's about,
Yeah, right. We are in that, aren't we? Right.
oh, we sure are. But Mr.
Mm.
Fredericks and Annie, now it's a story that I can carry with me as I see some of the hate start to dissipate. And instead, people coming together and saying, we are one. Because I think that's the message of your story that you just told. We are one.
Absolutely.
Uh, and
Mm.
that's a story from your childhood.
Mm.
Uh, it's so it's so touching. Thank you for sharing that with us. And I guess that also leads to another point that maybe you can talk about, and that is the power of stories. It seems to have a universal appeal. Uh, how do stories pull us together as humans, as people?
Mm. Well, I'd like to just turn that around and say, what do you think? But uh, how does
I'm asking you. It's my show, so I
yeah,
can.
but for one thing, it's ageless. I mean, it's happened. I mean, as soon as the caveman learned to talk, I mean, they were telling stories. Somebody was coming in and saying, "This big," or something. So, and and then finding that we share. I think in storytelling for me, when I found that the same story is told, very much the same story is told in Hawaii, in Australia, in Africa, something like it. Then it ties us. It shows we're all one. We are.
And is the world is starting to uh, go into sides to understand your point, to understand that we are one? It reminds me of the motto for the United States going back to the founding, E pluribus unum, as
Mhm.
many one. And you're saying that's the power of storytelling. It will bring us into the one.
Amen. Amen.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, then you must be the high priestess of storytelling because you've been doing that for a long, long time.
Surely there's somebody older than me, right? I don't know.
I don't know, but is, Gwenda, I don't know how to say this, but being having moved to Asheville in 2008 and getting into storytelling in 2012 and
Mm.
then getting to meet you, you've been just such an inspiration to so many people. And there are other tellers out there that I know that inspire. I've had them on the show.
Mhm.
But you, your presence, your grace, the love that you're sharing through stories, to me is so powerful. So I hope I'm not embarrassing you when I call you the Grande Dame of storytelling. But
Right.
in my
Thank
heart and in my soul, that's exactly what who you are and who you are to me. You're the Grande Dame of storytelling.
you.
So, have you received? Now, I guess I have to kind of ramp it down a little, so your head doesn't explode with all those nice things I just said.
Right. Right. Cut her down.
But here's another thing that might cause your head to explode. How about any awards that you've received?
Oh yeah. Oh dear Lord. Do you have the name that the I had two, and
I
I
think I
forgot.
mentioned one in the introduction, the Storytelling Guild, North Carolina.
Yeah, right. And I'm not thinking of what that is, but it's the storytelling association, right?
And you were part of the beginning of that association.
That's right, in the North Carolina state. Yes, that was fun, sitting in chairs, folding chairs, and deciding about, how this would be. That was glorious, right?
And how did that plan? Can you tell us what that conversation might have been about, and how did you go from that conversation to creating this incredible guild? And if I may,
Right.
before you answer that, just let my audience know, let the people know that the North Carolina Storytelling Guild last month had a show, and they do it every year. They're wonderful people. They do so much for tellers in this state,
Mhm.
probably around the country as well. But tell us about your conversation and what role you played in the founding.
Oh, I don't know. Remember that uh, Sandra Gudger and I went together, and there were many of us that met in a camp, I think, near Greensboro. And I remember that Sandra and I were on the way to one of the meetings, and we found a spider, and I have a poem about that spider and how we bent over with our rumps in the air, watching this lady go across her business, and we moved things out of her way, so that it became all wrapped up in this spider, which is kind of like, the story. Then getting in with other people. Well, I think, and no, we shouldn't do that. How meetings go when something is being created. Uh, it sort of found its own form in what people said, sitting in chairs in a circle, and from what one said, this said yes, and that could happen, and then another, and it is invisible, but it takes form in between you, into what happened, which is dead many people since, I think.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, it's such a gift. And your that story reminds me of something Will Rogers once said, and that is a horse is a camel designed by a committee.
I love Will Rogers. Yeah,
Okay.
right.
It's one of those things, and just for the record, I had been a consultant, a facilitator, helping organizations run their meetings and helping teach people how to facilitate meetings. And I have to tell you, I'm the worst team member on a
Mhm.
committee because it just drives me nuts because people are just talking. Let's make a decision. Let's make it together. We don't have to tell all this superfluous information just to make a decision. But that's me. I'm glad you stuck with it though.
Mhm.
So
Yeah,
how about
right.
now? I think it was recently. This is December, but recently you did a story on Zoom. You were part of a show with.
Yesterday, right.
Tell us about that show.
Oh gosh. Well, it was a meeting actually, and that's Sheila Arnold. And they do, and and I can't have the full term definition of what they are, but they've been meeting and of storytellers, and so we all got together and told tales, and I told a short one about a little lady and going to find a story, find where illness had been, and then bringing health. So it was a lot, and it's hard. I haven't really straightened it out in my head right now. There was a lot that happened, and new storytellers to hear, and that thing of intention. I think that's with all of us, is that let the story be heard. Let it be heard, whatever way.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. So it's so important to share that story. You mentioned Sandra Gudger, and she also founded the Asheville Storytelling Circle, of which we're both members. And my last guest explained the storytelling circle. Yeah, you're waving a finger.
I was there when she decided to do it.
Oh, well, tell us about that.
Oh, right, we were in. It was a weekend thing, and I think it was Connie put some of those weekends on. Also, my friend Mimi Shackelford was sponsored those. Anyway, Connie and or we had one of the sessions at ACT, and I had been doing that. It was my first time for telling stories sitting down and to an audience. But it was an ACT, which was, I mean, that's what it's made for, everybody's sitting down too. But Sandra had been doing something. She came out, everybody gone. She came out of the curtains, and I think Connie was there, and Sandra said, I have decided to start a storytelling circle. I said, well, I'll come. And I think Connie said, well, I'll come too. And that was it. I mean, it was, we make a lot of how things begin, but they're usually pretty simple. They're just somebody decides to do it. And but it was, I can see her, deciding, and and what a one to do it, because Sandra, once she sets her mind on something, she's going to do it. And so it became.
And this is our 25th year. We're celebrating our 25th year.
Oh
So
my
this must
gosh.
be something special to you and Sandra.
Yeah. Right.
Uh, and I, right now, folks, the Storytelling Circle meets once a month. And this is for our audience to better understand what we do. We meet once a month and we have members that are tellers. And I think someone described it, some are professional tellers, like Connie Reagan Blake and Michael Reno Harrell and a few others. But we also have what we call semi professional tellers, which are people like me that are retired and we just love to tell. And if we get paid, that's really nice, but that's not the reason we tell. So I think it was Charlie St. Clair that used the term semi professional. But we also, if I'm not mistaken, we also have people that just come to listen to stories. I remember sitting around at one meeting and this folks, ACT, by the way, is the Asheville Community Theater,
Right.
and that's where it began. But now we're meeting at an apartment complex, and there was a gentleman that had just moved to Asheville that came in to listen to stories being told. And I sat next to him, and he was an African American man. And when we go around to introduce everyone, kind of nudged him. I said, please introduce yourself. And he did. And he just said, I'm here because I love hearing stories. And I remember after everyone told, he gave a special applause. And folks, that's the power of storytelling. It's also the power of something that Gwenda was part of, that our friend Sandra Gudger helped create or did create. And it's the power of story again to bring people together. I remember this is a little bit sad for me, but I teach classes on storytelling at OLLI, the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute. It's for people who are retired. It's learning in retirement. And last fall, I taught a class, and we had two tellers that were so good. One was a relatively young retiree in her maybe mid 60s, and the other gentleman, David, was just a 87-year-old man from Texas who had been a Baptist minister, then a Presbyterian minister, and he's very liberal, but he's from the panhandle of Texas. And he told the story of growing up during the Dust Bowl.
Mm.
And I took him to a meeting at the Storytelling Circle, and he had a very kind of deep voice. And he and I just got to be such good friends in a short period of time.
Mm.
Then he and the other woman died in March within a month of each other.
Wow.
So I had put on a show in November from the class, and both of those stories that each person told was recorded. So we put on a show at Ollie, and we called it Stories from Heaven and Earth.
Wow.
And we
That's
showed those two recordings. And I get chills just telling you about that because they were members of also the Readers Theater Group, the Autumn Players TAP. And the people from TAP, the Autumn Players, were so moved when they heard the stories. And I think that's a gift that we as storytellers can give. And it's a gift that literally keeps on giving
Mm.
because that's what we were able to do. And I have to throw in a little plug if you don't mind. I taught another class this spring, and it was on Zoom. And I don't know if you're finding this, Gwenda, but Zoom, a lot of people complain about it because it's not interpersonal enough and you don't get to see and touch people and there's technical issues. But I have to tell you, for this class, there was magic in Zoom. We had 8 people that we broke into separate breakout rooms. And
Mhm.
even though they weren't there physically, they got so close together. They're now keeping a group that is continuing after the class.
Wow.
And
Mm.
then on December the 9th, we're going to have a show where 6 of the tellers will tell. And I have to tell you that these are brand new tellers. It seemed like they've been on stage for years. They were so good and so natural.
Right. Mm.
And I hope you can attend. I'm going to send you a link to that. And there's one teller. Are you an animal lover?
Me?
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, we've always had animals in the house, and I love especially cats, right?
Well, this is a dog story that one of the tellers will share. And it is so powerful and so moving. And even though it's about a relationship between a person and a dog, it's really about love, courage. And it reminds me, in a way, of your stories because your stories are about love and courage.
Mm.
And I just hope you can hear when Kay tells her story. It's amazing, and this woman has so many stories that she can share. She has played. She's a tennis player. She played tennis with Billie Jean King, and from that she met Elton John. Every year, Elton John throws a birthday party for Billie Jean King, and my friend Kay goes out every year. So again, it's the power of stories. And if I may add, I think it's also the power of good people.
Mm.
I don't
Mm.
know. Your view of storytellers may be the same as mine, may be different, but I find storytellers to be among the nicest people, big hearts, uh, sharing love through their stories. How do you find storytellers to be?
Well, all kinds, of course. But there is a certain decorum about the storytelling itself, and some knows and some, shouldn't. And I think, and of course, being to be a professional, then you're into performance. There's a difference when performing stories uh, is in some ways opposition to just telling in a circle of folks. Uh, and but I think that many storytellers have overcome that because they check in to that what holds us all alike in the story, and so it becomes a brotherhood, sisterhood, whatever you call it, a human being. We're all, and the stories are about the expressions or the experiences that we've had together. And so when someone is telling a tale of something that happened to them, then someone will say, "Oh yeah, 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 that happened to me." Right? Exactly. So, and that's what makes it so great. It's what makes us one.
Well, it's I have a couple of notes on that, and one is I told probably the most difficult story that I could tell last year at the Folk Arts Center, and I don't want to go into a lot of the details now. Maybe on the show at some point I'll tell it, but it was about a mental health journey that I've been on, and you were in the audience, Gwenda, and
Mhm.
afterwards you came up and you hugged me and you thanked me, you talked about courage to tell the story. that moment, that moment meant so much to me because having you say that coming from you and with respect that I hold for you, wow, that meant everything. So
Mm.
that
So
was
bad. Right.
that was
Mm.
special. But there was something else that was special. Earlier, I mentioned our mutual friend David Joe Miller. And
Mhm.
just for the audience sake, David Joe was born in Jonesboro and he has moved to Asheville and he's just been such a powerful force in storytelling, producing and telling as well. And I think I just heard from David. He's taking some time off from storytelling. He just needs to clear his head. But I recall that he had a special show. It was at a brewery in Asheville, and you were telling along with a gentleman from New Hampshire. And
Scott Ainsley, he's a blues singer.
tell us about how you met and
Uh, oh
all
my,
that.
right. Okay. Well, Scott, and I've got a long letter from him. I have it because he's had to go off the road because, like, singers and storytellers, there's no, the performance places are, not there, especially
Because of the
the
pandemic.
pandemic, right? Uh, and Scott, oh, it was in Brevard, and it was a storytelling festival, and it was and he was telling with another storyteller, and her name's clean out of my head. She was grand, but he did this blues, very little telling, but in between the songs, and it was like he was taking us to another place, and I loved it. So spoke to him afterwards, and praised him like an old lady. Oh, that was wonderful. All right. Bless us, right? and your hands, oh, they were grand. I just got a really long letter from him. And so we started, and he's a great thinker as well as being a great singer. So, and to the philosophy of the world. And so that was an incredible friendship. Remarkable man, right?
And how about that? I'm trying to recall. I remember he did some music and you did some stories, but it was about the relationship. When was it that you first met? Was it like 5 years ago?
Oh, no,
10?
no, no, right. It was 11 or 12 years ago, I think.
And you've
Right.
maintained that friendship since then.
Oh, yeah, right.
How often do you guys communicate? You said you just got a letter from him, but how often? You must have
Often,
some.
well, because of the computer, and because you can, you can connect there pretty constantly. Not always, but like as you see, he's got a long letter, and which I haven't read. It'll take a while. And
Well, Glenda, you've been you said that you're 90 years old. You'll be 91 in February. You've lived a wonderful, rich life. You've given a lot. Is there a special time in those 90 years that speak to you that maybe you could share with us?
oh dear, I don't know. Hmm, special time.
Yeah, in your 90 years, uh,
Hmm,
maybe
mirth.
you moved to Asheville, or your husband, your children.
Hmm, hmm, right, long special. I mean, a long series of specials.
Go
Uh,
ahead and share some with us.
it might be that moment when I came out of the library with books for the children and dropped them and leaned over to pick them up. And John Bridges was there, and he said, "How would you like to be a storyteller? How would you like to come to the library and tell some stories to children?" I think that was pretty, had some gold around it.
Oh.
It is. Uh,
So it was that moment that
it took me into a completely, because of loving books myself, and have always loved what the environment of a book is wonderful to me. That, I mean, you're going to find something new. You share a bit of life with someone else. It may be like yours, it may be entirely different, and give you new ideas about life. Uh, the books themselves. In my house is my kids came in, and one of them said, "There is a book in every chair in the living room. What are you doing, saving places or something?" Right. Um, I don't know, that moment, I guess, it just stands out right now. There are many, many, many moments, but
so you must have had a heck of an impact on your children in that you have two teachers and you have a musician. So to me, storytelling is also about growth. You've
Mm,
you've
mm.
helped so many people grow, and it sounds like you really have had a major impact on your children and their growth as human beings, not just as teachers and musicians, but as human beings. You have to be awfully proud.
I'm proud, but I think sometimes the children grow because in opposition, like, oh Lord, Mama, why are you doing that? And then I'm not going to do that. I think that had something in just becoming, to watching people become who they are going to be it's that's sacred.
It sounds like you didn't direct your children, you let them become who they are, and that by that they were able to choose their life pattern.
I think that was a gift from my parents, uh, and I grew up in Shirley Temple time, and when I was 3, that's what I wanted to be because she was up there dancing with her curls bouncing up and down. And mother even sat me in a chair and took bobby pins and goop and tried to make little curls, but when she took them out, zoop, down they went, the straight hair. I did manage to learn to tap dance, and I could sing and have sung for much of my life. But Shirley Temple was. Mm.
Well, I will not ask you to tap dance on our show. But we're
Mm.
talking about raising children, and we kind of did the same thing with our two sons. Instead of telling them what they should do or what they should not do, we let them follow really who they are. And the results ended up being a little strange because my son in Cincinnati is an IT professional. My
Ah,
son in LA is an actor, actor, Uber driver, but he's an actor. I don't know where we went wrong, but we let we let Greg choose his own career, and we sent him to a school for creative and performing arts in Cincinnati, and he just blossomed as an actor. And he's struggling, but he is so happy because he is who he is, and he's following his own dreams. And as a parent, that's so important. Instead of trying to tell your kids what they should or shouldn't do, it's
mm.
let them be themselves.
Right. Good for you. Right.
And good for, well, actually, I have to be totally honest. Good for my wife. Like you, she grew up with parents that just let her be herself.
Mhm.
And that was a value that she carried with us. And I grew up a little bit different. No, I grew up a lot differently. So I was able to take what I learned from my wife, Cindy, and we let our kids be themselves instead of telling them how they should or shouldn't be. So let's see. What's up next for you? I mean, we're in a pandemic and we have Zoom and it's kind
Oh,
of
no, but did I tell you about discovering this little lady? Uh,
no.
I didn't. I mean, I told the story about the stories about heaven and hell, and how this little this woman. I mean, God. She was so good that God said, "Is there anything that you want to do? Go any place you want to, anything you want to see?" And she said, "I've always wanted to go to heaven and hell and see what it was like, of course, beforehand, and be able to come back." And so she was allowed. Our angel came and took her, and they went to hell. And she saw the people seated at tables covered with wonderful foods, and they were not eating; they were starving. And she said, "Why? Why aren't they eating?" And the angel said, "Look again." And they couldn't bend their arms to feed themselves. So they were literally starving. And she said, "Enough, enough," and was weeping and said, "Come, let's go to heaven." And when they got to heaven, they saw the people were seated at the picnic tables, had the same wonderful food spread out before them, and they had the same affliction of their arm. They couldn't bend them to feed themselves, but they were reaching out, taking food and feeding their neighbor. And the good man, I mean, the good woman was completely happy.
And that's the power of again of love and community.
Right.
And here you are telling about an old woman going to heaven and finding out about what love really is. And it
Right.
sounds so much like the way you were raised. When you tell the story about Annie and that experience, that's about sharing food with someone and creating kind of a heavenly experience on earth. Wow,
Mm.
that is so special. Gwenda, I have just so enjoyed every minute with you on the show. And I can't wait to maybe our next Asheville Storytelling Circle meeting. I hope you show up because I am just so happy and so proud. I want to share you with everybody in the circle.
Right.
And this show also will be
Circle,
online.
right. And I've missed it. And hopefully I can get back there. Right.
Oh,
Until all you go on the on the Zoom anyway, right?
yeah, you don't have to go out. You just have to click on Zoom.
Mm.
And I got to tell you, your presence at those meetings means the world to all of us. So
Thank you. Thank you.
thank you. And thank you for being my guest. But I think we're going to go out with a special treat today because I think Queen Bee and the Honey Lovers are going to take us out. But I have to tell our audience a little bit about Queen Bee. She's a wonderful, wonderful woman, and she will be on the show. And I asked her if she could be on the show, but she has recently given birth to her son. So she's going to need a few months to taking away from her group, the Honey Lovers, and also she won't be on the show right away. But it's a treat for you and for our audience. I want to again have you hear Queen Bee and the Honey Lovers because after that, I'm going to say goodbye to Gwenda and we're going to both wave and say goodbye to our audience. So here you go, Queen Bee.
Bountiful valley, way up high, fertile and green land of the sky. Tip of the Blue Ridge mountain range, lengthy autumns, lingering springs. Upon the parkway, take a drive, slope down the French Broad, take a dive, maybe enjoy a local brew. All that and built more too in Asheville.
And with that, folks, Gwenda and I want to thank you all for sharing your time with us. And we just want to wave and say goodbye, everybody. And goodbye, Gwenda. We love you.
Bye.
Bye bye.